Hello and welcome to our series, Conscious Aging. I'm Heidi from the Wisdom Factory, and today we had the title, The Gift of End of Life, Doulas. And our guests are Lynne Feldman, who is here, but our other guests were not able to come in. So we decided just to talk a little bit about doulas with Lynne, who is a professional doulas, besides of other things. And then we will reschedule the talk as a panel discussion as it was intended. And today also Martin Ucik is still here with us. And you say hello for a moment and then we give over to Lynne.
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here. Happy to listen to you, Lynne, and learn more about doulas and end of life, which is slowly approaching for me too.
Yeah, we cannot negate that we are entering in the last third of life. I always say in the third half of life.
So. Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, but you know, it's not bad to have all this experience behind us and looking towards how do you say, towards or about life in a different way. So let's welcome Lynne again. I had her on our panel discussions in the Conscious Living, Conscious Dying series, which I did in honor of Mark Davenport, who was my husband and co-host who died. It's exactly 8 months ago. And if you are interested in watching these, there were very interesting panel discussions with Lynne and many other people. So Lynne, would you like to introduce yourself? Maybe first say some words about you generally, and then we go into the doula thing. Okay.
Thank you, Heidi. Hi, Martin. I wear many, many hats. I have many, many interests. The thing that coalesced my interest in end of life was in 2010, where I unexpectedly was diagnosed with breast cancer. They did a PET scan of my body, and lo and behold, they found an independent and deadly lung cancer, which was even more surprising than the breast cancer because I'd never smoked a cigarette and had never been in a smoking environment. Being a researcher by profession and trade, I found out that 20% of people who get lung cancer have never smoked. They don't know why, and they do tend to be women. So they're doing some research on that. Anyway, having this horrible situation, I also encountered my best integral friend, and Martin, I know that you know her, Robin Reinach from New York. And at the time, her sister-in-law, a doctor, was dying of lung cancer. And she had never smoked either. She had small cell lung cancer, and that one is deadlier than what I had. Hers had a life expectancy of 18 months. So as I find out that I have lung cancer too, I'm following along with the story about Robin's sister-in-law. And what scared me just to my core was not the idea of death, but the fact that she died after 8-10 hours of agonizing screaming from pain. I had no idea. And this is not something that I wanted. So I began searching around for a modality by which I could more peacefully approach dying should my 2 cancers wind up taking my life. And somebody said to me, there are ways now that they can mitigate the suffering. My neighbor across the street, a lovely man from Germany, also wound up with cancer. He too wound up with a horrible death shortly after I got involved with my search for what you might call a good death. And that scared me as well. He worked with a doula, but I found out that there are many different ways of being a doula. It's one of these new up and coming practices that are not really regulated. And his experience was so awful and so unfair. And I had known him, of course, he was my neighbor, and this is not how I wanted him to pass. So I began looking for sort of a best practice of being a doula. And I found it at my local hospital, Valley Hospital in Ridgewood, New Jersey. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the different ways of being a doula and why I wound up affiliating with Valley's and what I consider to be the gold standard of being a doula, and then what my experience was.
Can you maybe first say, before we had the shows in October, I never knew about doulas. What does doula mean?
As with a birth doula who is there to support emotionally, as well as physically, as well as spiritually, the mother giving birth. She's not a doctor, he's not a nurse, but they are there to give any kind of support they can to the mother at birth. Seeing as this too is a life passage, it was understood that we had no one in the hospital next to us other than, although nurses are very compassionate, they are overworked, they have many patients, and they cannot sit with you 24 hours a day and hold your hand through your transition, through death. So the idea became that you could hire someone to sit with you as you pass. Now, again, this brings up the many different ways that you can hire a doula. In New York, there are certificates for being a doula, and I've looked into them. You can go into any search modality, and there are doulas for hire. However, I received months of training from specialists who taught me about the physical, spiritual, emotional, and family challenges that one has when one is sitting with the dying. And many of these people who are hired out as doulas are independent. You don't know what their experience is, and they come to you without knowing much about your medical background or your wishes. I don't know how long they spend with you, but the program at Valley, which was started by Henry Fursko Weiss, who was a licensed clinical social worker, saw this as what I would say is a completely integral program. He doesn't know the word for it, but we know the word for it. And when I looked into it, I decided this is how I wanted to be trained, not just somebody who shows up at your house and sits next to you and, you know, chats with you until you pass, but somebody who was working with your complete medical and psychiatric and family team. So I became a part of a big team that could advise me. Also, the software involved in the Valley Hospital program was first rate. What we would get on the screen, and I'll explain the training, but first let me tell you, we would have a patient by age and initials. Everything was confidential. And the reason for the stipulation about age is that there was a separate doula program for babies called the Butterfly Program. This, I mean, I get goosebumps every time I think of this. They would sit with the parents and the dying baby and child. It turned out there was no way. I had a brand new grandson. There was no way I could do that, and that required separate training. The people who signed up for that were usually neonatal nurses who were retired and were used to seeing babies be very sick and die. The rest of us wanted to deal with, now there was a conversation, I did sign up for a 16-year-old boy who, although he was considered part of the Butterfly Program, Because I taught high school for 25 years, I felt I was in a good position to handle the passing of a 16-year-old boy. So the age had to do with the fact that you wouldn't be suddenly put in with a 3-year-old child, who was dying and really beyond your training. You would then have a block that you could sign up for. It was strictly voluntary. So you would put your name down for, let's say, 4 hours. And we made sure that the patient, the client, was covered for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week until they passed. There was never a moment when this person was left alone without a trained doula. And I'll explain why this is important in a minute. It was only after we committed to spending 4 hours, and it was interesting because the men tended to sign up for the overnights, but they were still working. These were people who survived on 3-4 hours sleep, and they would sign up for the 1 to 5 o'clock in the morning times, which I couldn't do because I'd fall asleep. So, I was able to schedule my alert time and when I wasn't involved in something. And there was no commitment other than we did have to take 4 cases a year. That's it. That was the requirement for them investing in our training. Only then did you receive information as to the family, the illness, whether they were in the hospital, in a nursing home, or at home, and a telephone number of a contact person so that you could tell them you were coming. All right, the training. I've got my notes, so if you'll bear with me. This is the idea of a good death. And I don't even like speaking of a good death. It's even too frightening to think about. But it was as much a part of the client's, the patient's value system as possible. If this was, I had a Jewish man who was married to a non-Jewish woman, and he specified that at his death, he wanted the Jewish prayer of mourning to be read. She didn't like that idea because she wasn't Jewish, but that was his wish. When they signed up for the doula program, and one of the things that I asked was, as a non-Valley Hospital patient, could I be accepted as a doula client? I am treated at Sloan Kettering Hospital in New York City because of the complicated nature of my cancers. And they said, absolutely. Anybody can call us up, and there's a number for it in the listing of Valley Hospital, and immediately be accepted. At that point, you are given a booklet. And in the booklet, if you are capable still of doing so, you list everything that you would like to have next to you, near you, smells that you would like. Yes.
So now you are talking about you as a patient, not about your training as a doula.
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So the patient would say he loved the smell of lavender. So the doula would make sure that there was lavender near him. Did he want clergy to be present with him at any time? What music did he want? What pictures around him? What relatives he did and didn't want? And then plans for his funeral and death. And in making it concrete like that he had control over his passage was a tremendous relief. Now I'm switching hats again and thinking about myself as a double cancer patient, possibly facing that myself. And I felt tremendously relieved that I would be able to make up this manual when facing my time, that I would be able to, I do love lavender, and I would want gardenias in my room. And, there's certain things that I began to understand I would want accompanying me, and who I would want and who I would not want coming into my room. So that was me as the doula. All right. The training took about 4 months. And I don't have the book with me because I had to give it back, but it was a hefty volume. And we had top-notch, not only medical training, psychological training, and spiritual training. And we had to express ourselves spiritually during every session so that we never forgot that this was an ineffable event that we were helping to achieve, not clinical. So that's the Valley program. And let me see. One of the things that we were taught, and of course, I'm conversant with this, being an integral person, we were taught guided visualizations specifically for the dying. And I had a whole bunch of them. Many of my patients were Catholic and wanted Catholic guided imagery of meeting Jesus. So we were provided with that. We were provided for Hindu, Buddhist, Jewish, spiritual but not religious, so that we had guided meditations and guided journeys for all of them. We were taught by nurses something called Therapeutic Touch, which has been clinically proven to reduce the stress and tension of the dying. Aromatherapy was, as I said, very important. What the odors are that the person specified. If they were too far gone when they entered the hospice program, their relatives could say, you know, he always loved the smoke from I don't know, some odor that he really liked. Now, the next thing that we had to be taught is how to deal with the families. The families were our clients as well. So let me tell you about one of the people. We had a very difficult time with her. She was the non-Jewish spouse of the Jewish man who was really trying to die. And I mentioned him the last time, Heidi, you may remember. He had a serious medical condition 7 years prior. She defied the doctor's orders and did her own version of healing him. She was convinced that she could keep him from dying by doing the same thing. She insisted on feeding him. This is an absolute no-no when the person is no longer capable of swallowing. He was incapable of swallowing. She would order us out of the room, and we were told we had to respect the wishes of the spouse. But we knew, and we were instructed by the nurses and the doctors who spoke to us, do not let this wife alone with her husband. She will push food down his mouth. She was very difficult. So it's those kind of interactions. It's not just sitting with the person and chatting and waiting for the person to pass. But it's how do you do? Yes, go ahead.
This is sort of being an advocate for the needs of a dying person. It's really so important because often people don't understand. And I didn't understand either at the beginning in my first case, let's say, when I accompanied dying people. And let's say I began to understand when my mother died and her caretaker, she always wanted to feed her. And I said, no, don't give her that. And I took care for that. And we only moistured her mouth.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. But you really have to defend them sometimes. Also against the nurses who were washing them and everything. Yes. That was also cruel, so hard. They touched them so hardly.
Exactly. And I told Heidi last time, the entire family showed up, all the grandchildren and, you know, the brothers and they had a picnic as he is trying to die. Now, he's not had water or sustenance in 8 days. He is obviously in the dying process. And they're going, okay, who ordered the coleslaw? Who ordered the roast beef sandwich? They're turning on the radio. Oh, Grandpa always loved this music. And I'm supposed to respect the family, but I am there, you're right, as the patient's advocate. This is the kind of training that Valley offered. The other thing that, all right, this is on the butterfly program. We were met with an entire team. I was in contact with the patient's doctors, his nurses, and I had the nurse's phone number 24/7. If I saw that she was agitated more than usual, I called up the nurse and she would come over and give more of a sedative to the individual. I was never left alone guessing what to do, which was so important to have, the doctors and the nurses conferring on the spot. Well, what should we do about his medication? And I would do the reporting. I also had to keep a log, literally minute by minute, how that individual patient was doing. And when I took over from somebody else, I would read their notes to see what was happening. So we were in constant phone contact with one another, as that when we sort of, like, I would take over from Lori, who had the 4-hour shift before me. She might say, watch out, this is going on, people are intruding and he's getting agitated. So, and then I would review the notes and I would know what I was dealing with. We also knew exactly what to do once the person passed. We had that covered. We stayed with the body until it was removed from the house. Now, another reason we were there was to give time off for the family. We were told, for goodness sake, go to sleep, take a nap, go shopping, go to the mall. We've got it covered. We have your cell phone. If something happens, we will call you immediately, but get out of the house. This is not healthy for you. So we were there in service of the family as well. And as we know, and I'm a lawyer who's dealt with what happens with wills and the property of deceased people. I just had a recent situation, although I didn't take the case, where somebody walked in after the body had been removed and removed a bunch of paintings from the house and took them. What can we do about that? And I said, I'm sorry it wasn't mentioned in the will, and I'm sorry that your sister-in-law did that. I know it was promised to you, but we really can't. It wasn't in the will, and your mother's now gone. So there is all sorts of activity with the families not speaking to one another. I had one lovely, sweet lady, and I was with her for a week before she passed. She had 3 daughters. 2 were angels. They were there every day. The 3rd hadn't spoken to the sisters or her in like 2-3 years. And I said, did you explain to them that your mother is actively dying of cancer? And they said, yeah, and she's not interested. Well, she showed up. Now, what happens after our duties are done and the body has left? We are usually asked to come to the funeral because we've become part of their family. We consider that an honor. I cannot tell you what it was like for all of us doulas, because we got to know one another intimately, over our various patients, and we would hug in the back of the funeral. This was our offering to the departed.
Yeah, that leads me to the question, is this all voluntary work?
Absolutely.
So how can we expect that maybe somebody will do that for us?
The doula program at Valley, and again, I'm not talking about these independent contractors. I don't know what they're doing. I don't know what their training is, but from what I heard, well, let me just tell you about Gerhard, my neighbor. He was told by his hospital, oh, we have a bunch of doulas, whose name is on the list. They're independent contractors, call any of them. Well, she turned out to be a nurse, so they felt, oh, no, she's a nurse. She arrived after Gerhard came home. She had no idea what his medications were. She had no idea what, his treatments had been. And by the time she arrived and he was out of his morphine, she didn't know who his doctor was. She didn't know who to contact. And it was a Sunday, and the pharmacists that dispense morphine don't open until 6 in the morning. So he was left screaming in pain from midnight until 6, and so even though she was a nurse, because this is not an integral, holistic team practice, he was left, I can't, she was just, and I knew Gerhard for many, many years. So why do we do it? We had to say why we did it. I mean, that was before we were accepted into the program. They interviewed us. I said, I'm an only child. I have basically no family. My mother and my father died without me being present. I really regretted that. I was scared of my own dying. I didn't want it to be like Robin's sister-in-law. And I wanted to see how I could visualize a better format. What we heard was many of them had sat as you did, Heidi. They had experienced what the proper care of the dying looks like. And when they found out that Valley was this complete integrated team where you were never left alone, people had instructions about how to touch you and deal with you, what music to play or not to play. Anyone who had suffered a loss and had journeyed with their loved one, this is their service, and I considered it a spiritual practice.
So my next question, and afterwards I give you, Martin, the possibility is there enough people to take care for so many people dying?
Our class, which was half a year's worth, consisted of 16 people, many retired nurses. I have not heard, I've not been in contact with them. My own husband died, as Heidi knows, unexpectedly while I was in Scotland. So again, I wasn't able to be with a loved one. And after that, I fell into a very, very deep depression. And I think after 2 years, I'm only just beginning to come out of it. So I have not continued with my doula volunteering. I could always go back, but I have to make sure that I'm in the proper mental setting. Rick and I were married for 47 years. Obviously very close, and neither one of us had really any family except for our children. So we meant a lot to one another. It wasn't that there wasn't a brother or sister we could turn to. So losing him, just so, I've told Heidi, I was on the phone with him from Scotland at 10 o'clock in the morning, and by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he was gone. It was just too much of a shock for my spirit and my body. So I've not done that. I'm doing other things, but I'm not doing that. But yes, there are enough people who are dedicated, and because they see this beautiful integrated practice, and whatever questions we have. For example, there's Heidi. I don't know if you saw this, but we saw it in so many of our clients near the time of death. They begin picking at something in the air. Did you see this with Martin at all? I'm not Martin. Did you see this at all?
Sorry, I was just a little bit distracted because we have a viewer, Angela Poriski, and she was saying that she was thanking us for the important topic. And then she says, so sorry to hear about your loss, Lynne. I'm sending you love from Vancouver, Canada.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you very much.
So can you say again what you asked me?
Did you notice your husband picking at the air, at like an imaginary something floating in front of him?
No, okay. I didn't, because his passing was so abrupt. He fell over and was dead. I noticed the days before that he had a glassy way of looking into the world. It was like wonder, like a child, that I noticed about a week before.
They have noted that. We were told by the doctors. They don't know what that is exactly. And they often, and I have experienced this with several of them, it's like they're picking or touching something. And of course, what are they touching? What are they seeing? And, spirit guides, we don't know. The doctors were just saying they are investigating this phenomenon because they see it so often. I wanted to say one other thing. Once again, if the person was showing agitation, which, that they can very much, we had instant calls to the doctor and the nurses so that this person was never uncomfortable. And that, of course, was important to me as well as to the family.
And this is what I missed with Mark. I couldn't, the Sunday, and he had the problem with the pain, and we had a new pain medication which didn't work. I couldn't reach anybody to ask what to do. And who am I to know which morphine or whatever is better? And they didn't tell me about the side effects of morphine. And so he has extra pain. So this is really bad when you have to invent yourself these things. And you don't really know. I mean, you know a lot already, but you never know everything. And it would be good to have a professional health practitioner who knows these things, and you could ask all the time. Instead,
I would beg people to by the way, Valley Hospital's hospice program is rated #1 in New Jersey. And I won't brag for them, but I will. They are the only doula program as of 3 years ago, so it may have changed, that has utilized this integral, holistic program. So, if they say, yes, we have a doula program, it might be like this other hospital where they just kind of have a list of names of people who'll sit with you, or is it a completely integrated program where the doula is able to make contact immediately with a nurse and or a doctor? It's just critical.
So important. So Martin, you are silent all the time. I wonder if you want to ask something or add something to what Lynne is saying.
Yeah, first of all, I wanted to thank you for doing this and sharing this with us, because I didn't know that this exists. So, and for your openness and vulnerability about your own path. I cannot really relate to any of that from any firsthand experience, because all the deaths in my family have been so different. But what came, maybe somewhat unrelated, came up for me was that I'm very interested in people sharing a higher or deeper purpose, or finding their deeper or higher purpose, and possibly sharing it with a partner if they have one. And very often people, when I teach this or try to teach this, they kind of look at me and say, well, what could that possibly be, right? If they don't have a purpose. And so when I heard you speak, I went like, wow, this is a really great example where people can volunteer or, find a deeper, higher meaning in their life by doing something like that. So I will take that as as an example to give to people when they say, well, I don't know what my deeper purpose is than to make money and enjoy my life.
Yeah.
And that's a great, a great service. And I can just feel how that expands one's human growth and potential, one's awareness, one's spiritual awareness. I live across from a cemetery here in Istanbul. Looked right off my window, and one of my assistants came today and said, well, yesterday there was a funeral and I can just no longer hear these funeral, it depresses me so much. And she's like 26, and how can you walk every day in the cemetery and not get depressed? And I found it actually quite inspiring to walk in the cemetery and more or less meditate on what my purpose is and what I want to leave behind. And my daughter is a doctor now. She's in residency in the Bronx. And so that I also noticed that it gives me some comfort to have 4 children and, this hope that they will be there for me when the time comes.
Fortunate you.
That's what I wanted to share, what came up for me while you were speaking. And I'm really touched by what you shared.
Thank you. Angela says also something about you, a deeper purpose for our lives. Such a good point you are making. And I do think that's right, because when you assist people dying, it's not as horrible as we imagine. Yeah. It is giving such a moment of, it is sad, yes, but it's also this heart-opening experience, especially when you were with the person the time and shared these hours. That's, how do you say, priceless. It's yeah, I wouldn't miss it. Really, I'm glad that I was there when Mark passed, and also in the time before. Also, it's not easy, but it's really something which is deeply touching and gratifying. Because you could at least have done a little bit for another being in the world. And the worst thing I could imagine, and I really do fear that, to be left alone somewhere on a hospital corridor when you are dying and nobody caring for you. Because I do imagine that I do it even for my animals when they are dying, to be with them, you are getting held in some way. Although it's your work to go over, but you get a sort of a frame where you can relax and where you can, I don't know what to say about it, but I imagine alone would be not so good.
And again, if people are worried that doulas cannot go to a hospital, they can. I've done many sessions in a hospital, and they're completely fine with doulas. They're very familiar with, at least in Bergen County, they know the Valley program, and so there's no issue with us sitting there.
Let me say another thing, Angela. She is really an angel. She says, "Oh, Heidi, yes, I was there and helped my father-in-law as he transitioned, and it was such a beautiful experience."
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we try to do, even when we did the show, the Living, Conscious Dying, the series, and with these episodes, to tell people that death is not something to be so afraid of, and to fear the fear of death, It's shying away from that is, how do you say, it's making it like a monster, but at the end it's not. So we can learn that and get more confident. As I said, the only fear I have is to suffer and to be alone. That's
as Heidi knows, I had a scare in October where they misdiagnosed a very critical illness that I had. They told me that my breast cancer had returned and metastasized absolutely everywhere in my body, and I had 2.5 years to live. And it was a long, long story. It was a misdiagnosis. And so again, one of the things that you can do is fill out this booklet with your wishes, just like you would do a will, and put the book away and say, should the time come, I've already thought of what I want. And so I started, I definitely want gardenias and lavender, and I want Enya playing, or whatever. And that sort of helped go through that horrible month and a half until I found out it was a misdiagnosis. The other story I wanted to share, the first person that I sat with was a friend of 30 years. And he asked me to come in because his wife and his 3 sons were completely in denial that he was dying. When I walked into his hospital room, the adult children had bought, I mean, I love books. You know, you can see that from my bookcase. And they bought like bookcases full of how to beat cancer, you know, how to fight cancer. And he had asbestos, you know, that horrible asbestos related, and you don't recover from that. It's fatal. And I had to work with him and his family that was just, quote, dead set, unquote, on him fighting the inevitable. And I accompanied them through. He had some agonizing decisions to make at the end of his life. And by the time his family understood what was going on and I was able to be with him his last day, they had accepted and they were quiet and peaceful. So again, you are working with the family that doesn't want to hear the daddy who's never been sick a day in his life. That's it.
Yeah, and we don't allow them to be doing their own way, their own path, you know?
No.
Because death is a sort of a failure of Western medicine. We shouldn't die. I mean, they try now with artificial intelligence and all sorts of technical stuff to prolong life, which I don't think is a bad idea. But imagine you would live 900 years or something. I don't know if that would be the answer.
I wanted to say something else that I had mentioned in a previous conference that you and I had, Heidi. Ken Wilber wrote the introduction to my book because I used Grace and Grit as the textbook for my cancer journey. And a friend of mine from the integral world had organized with Ken, and I was going to attend an integral conference on death and dying. They had set it up. She had done a fantastic job. She even moved to Denver in order to facilitate this conference, and nobody signed up.
Angela says, unfortunately, death is often hidden.
Right.
Yeah, it's exactly that. The fear is bringing us to deny. And the thing is, we know it from psychology, what we fear and not look at it, then we fear it even more and more and more. But
That's
as
right.
soon as things come into light, the fear decreases.
Yeah.
We are just, let's say, stupid, you know. It's like little children who don't want to see around the corner because there might be the ghost or something.
Yeah.
Oh, dear.
So, Lynne, do you know how widespread these programs are throughout the United States? Because I have never heard about it. And I'm with Kaiser in California, and they asked me to fill out, like, I forgot now what the technical name is, but who, you know, will, you know, what music I want and I want to die and who, and all these things. You know, and my name as sort of like my representative and the second and the third. And it was quite a long paper. And I sat with my daughters and went through them with everything. So I found that a very, you know, kind of like encouraging and very mature process to involve my children in that case, you know, in that inevitable fate early on.
You know, Martin, that, again, being the researcher that I am, I don't know that answer, and I'm going to write it down as something to look up now. Again, I had looked through New York, and when I saw that these were freelancers, not trained, you know, they'll offer a certificate. So, you know, you get a certificate as a doula. I don't know what the training is, but again, you're not part of the whole team. And after my experiences, I can't imagine. And again, having my neighbor pass away with a nurse, it was horrible. So I'm going to do some research on that and see. But again, you have to be careful when people say, "I'm a doula, hire me. This is my, you know, what I'll charge you."
Yeah, that was my other question.
Yeah.
When you have to pay for that, which
No.
if it is a profession is also right, but who can afford that? Normally it was the task of the family members to pay
Exactly.
to stay with you. And now maybe they pay, yeah. But
well, again, the hospital does not. It is part of the hospice program, which is of no cost. Oops, hold on one second. Sorry. Carolina, I'm on a conference call being taped. Let me call you back. Okay, bye. That's my other hat. I feel well enough now to go back to my law profession, but I'm switching. I'm working with learning disabled special education students, because that's also in service when I see the little ones being literally destroyed. My grandson, who lives with me, was almost destroyed at the tender age of kindergarten by a teacher who didn't understand who and what he was. And I saw that and I went, no, this is not going to happen. Grandma's going to learn to be a special ed lawyer, which is what I'm starting to do. And this is just never going to happen. He's what we call I'll just throw this out. He's called a 2E child, twice exceptional. He has sensory processing disorder. It was something that happened because his mother was in labor for 24 hours on Pitocin. And they've now discovered there's a direct link to having some processing issues like fear of heights, fear of drowning. It sort of comes, it's an actual diagnosis called sensory processing disorder, but he has an astronomical high IQ. And the kindergarten teacher said he's a child at risk. He's defiant because at the singing concert, because he's so tall, they made him stand on the top riser. And he doesn't have good balance because of this issue. And he kept crying that he would fall. And she called him defiant. So, and, all sorts of letters home, you have a bad child. And little kid in kindergarten goes, I'm a failure. So, again, mommy to the rescue, grandma to the rescue. This is not going to happen. I'm going to take care of this. So,
good.
Anyway.
There are so many places where people would need us, volunteers, to do some work. I tried to go in the hospital after I had my cancer operation many years ago, and wanted to stay with people who have nobody. Yeah. But they didn't accept it. Neither the people nor the nurses nor as soon as there is no habit around these things.
Yes.
They think you are crazy, doing that.
Martin and Heidi, I am going to do research on this tomorrow, and I will get back to all of you, and you can post it. There is a need, and I would love to spread the word. Valley's, again, last I heard, Valley was not only the best program in the state of New Jersey, but in the country. But I will double check if it's still true, and where we are in this kind of holistic, integral. Boy, Ken, I wish.
Yeah, the thing is, not everybody lives there, no? we live in other parts of the world.
But you can get something started through a hospital. Look, we're called, my age, I'm 73. We senior citizens are called the silver tsunami. Because there are so many, we're all the baby boomers.
Yeah.
And they're, what's the number one medical specialty? Gerontology. Mm-hmm. They're going to have to be dealing with this.
Yeah. Yeah. I have done a show 2 weeks ago about integral gerontology. So
did you?
Who is interested, go to the website, thewisdomfactory.net, and look up dementia. I think it was called dementia, integral dementia.
Yeah.
So, was very interesting with Bettina Wichers. She is a German integral gerontologist.
Yeah. So, I will look that up, but I definitely will research this. Good question.
Yeah. So, we will see what we can do. And I'm very happy that Angela has found us. And her last sentence was, how to embrace death as a part of life is a better message than fighting. Just her thoughts. And I totally agree. Also, it's really difficult when you get your cancer diagnosis, and you think, and now you are going to die. That changes life completely. If it is yours or your partner's, it's really, bringing your life more or less upside down.
Yep.
And I sort of, when Mark died, I don't know, I'm still hanging in the, like half on the earth, between earth and sky. So halfway. I do these things and I love to do the things which we are doing.
Yeah.
But I still I don't know what to make of it, because, it seems so unreal to me.
Well, again, my husband, he was fine when I spoke to him at 10 o'clock in the morning, and by 3, he had died of a brainstem aneurysm. The other thing I will tell you, again, from my research, I joined a cancer support group for the first time 2 years after my diagnosis. Mm-hmm. And I found out that 2 years after the event is when people need help.
Okay.
They don't know why. I'm another clinical example. I'm only now overcoming, in 2019, I'm only now overcoming the shock and the grief. So Heidi, anybody who says you've got what they said to the poor little princes after Diana died, you have a month and then get your act together. Absurd, absurd, absurd.
No, we can function in the world still and quite well and everything, but the inner landscape is completely, like a big tractor went through.
Yeah, it is.
So anyway, we are almost at the end. If you want to still share something, or Martin, if you have still a question. Anyway, Angela, I want to tell you, we will do the panel discussion with Stuart Davis and Tarron Estes and Lynne again on another moment, because they were both not able to come. But it would be interesting to hear others. And I know Tarron is doing online courses, and Stuart, who integralists all know him, Stuart Davis, the famous musician, he was inspired, he told me, when his father died, and he was inspired to do the course, and he is a student of Tarron. And he's, like us, let's say, inspired to do something for people who are dying, because we can.
Yes.
And it is not normally provided for, this sort of assistance we can give to them. Certainly not by the medical profession. So,
no. Well, thank you for asking me, Martin. It's a pleasure to speak with you for the first time.
Likewise.
Okay, so thank you very much. And let's see again at the next panel discussion. And next week, there will be the session in German. It's about the use of drugs, of, how do you call that? Like LSD, where the consciousness opening drugs.
MDMA?
Yeah, for instance. And how it is working on your fear of death, because it disappears.
Yeah.
It is with a German psychotherapist who has a lot of experience in this field, and it will be very interesting too to hear that. And it's in the series also of conscious aging. Come and see it, and we will have still a whole month of conscious aging before we take over.
This one.
Yeah, that will be good. So if you don't know German, too bad, but he doesn't know enough English, because he was grown in East Germany, where they had to learn Russian, and so we have to do it in German. But nowadays you can have a transcript on YouTube, and that if you take it and put it into a translator, you can at least read what he was saying.
That's good.
And maybe we find somebody who talks about this topic also in English. If you know somebody, let me know. Okay, thank you very much, Angela. Bye-bye. And
Bye.
Martin, bye-bye. Lynn, bye-bye. And thank
Bye.
you, everybody. Bye-bye.